Chapter 3, Biological Macromolecules. Here, you are looking at a full Irish breakfast, complete with, well, mostly meat. But it is so good. Especially that stuff there on the left. That's called blood sausage. It's literally congealed pig's blood. And don't knock it till you try it. But why do we eat? Like all organisms, we require nutrients to build biological molecules and energy to power our bodies and cells. In this chapter, we will look specifically at the classes of biological macromolecules essential for all life: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. First, these large macromolecules were made from smaller, more readily available molecules. The majority of all biological macromolecules contain one of four elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Before we begin looking at each class of molecules, we have to see how these molecules are formed. Many mid-sized molecules, such as amino acids and nucleotides, are individual units called monomers, which are just a generic word we use. They link together by polymerization to form a polymer. So in this case, the monomer unit of a protein is called an amino acid, and the protein is the polymer unit. Thus, proteins are macromolecules consisting of a linked together set of amino acids. So polymerization requires energy from an outside source. It is not spontaneous. And the only way for a living thing to receive energy from an outside source is to either collect it from sunlight, nearby materials, or ingest food, like we do. Monomers polymerize through a condensation dehydration reaction. This releases a water molecule. Notice the hydroxyl group and the hydrogen between those two go out. Energy is stored within that bond. Hydrolysis literally means water splitting. This is where you take a water molecule, you break that bond, it releases energy, and the hydrogen goes on the one end of the monomer, and the other part of the monomer receives a hydroxyl group. You ever wondered where these biological macromolecules come from? Because we're made of these essentially. So in this next little segment of the video, I'm going to show you a little bit about how we got complex molecules from simple stuff found in early Earth's atmospheres and oceans. Ever wonder where life came from? Well, about 4.6 billion years ago, planet Earth was formed from the formation of the solar system. And left behind were many, many atoms. Those include carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. During Earth's early history, we had plenty of water, but it was just inhospitable for life. The water was too hot, and there was just no oxygen to sustain multicellular living things. So everything started off as non-living organic materials, as well as nitrogen-based materials. So what we see here is carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen in its diatomic form, diatomic hydrogen, ammonia, and finally water. All of these are very simple molecules made up of the four elements I just mentioned. Now, just like when you cook, you're adding heat. And adding heat allows for the breakdown and addition of certain molecules. So, since the sun was still relatively young, it had a lot more energy than it does now. But right now it's middle-aged. But in the beginning, it had a lot of energy. And that excess amounts of energy allowed for the breakdown of these molecules, as we see right here. And when you break these chemical bonds, the atoms become free. And allowing us to free these atoms allows us, with the addition of the heated oceans, to form much bigger molecules. And so with the heat of the oceans coupled with the exorbitant amounts of light given off by the young sun, we were able to take these simple molecules and make them slightly more complex. Two of the earliest organic molecules was formaldehyde and hydrogen cyanide. Now you're probably wondering, these are obviously toxic to living things today, but the formation of these simple organic molecules paved the way for more complex organic molecules that we're going to really discuss in this chapter, the biological macromolecules. So imagine more sunlight, more heat from the water, and we're going to come up with something even more complex. And so from millions of years of continual breaking of bonds from simple organic molecules, you end up getting more complex organic molecules. On the left is a very simple amino acid called glycine, and amino acids, we believe, are the first organic biological macromolecules that first developed. And then on the right is ribose, which is a very important nucleic acid and one of the first to self-replicate, which is necessary for living things as cells self-replicate, especially the genetic material. And so if you imagine this going on and more lipids being formed, eventually the lipids will form the outer plasma membrane, which gives you the first cells known as bacteria.
Carbs. These days, you probably hear of people trying to watch their carbs, or maybe they're loading up on carbs before doing a marathon or a bike ride. Carbohydrates are an important source of energy in living things, and it is the first and most accessible form of energy. All carbs have a CH2O formula with a 1-to-1 carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen ratio. For example, glucose is C6H12O6. Carbs are classified into one of three groups. Monosaccharides, also known as simple sugars, this is the carb's monomer form, and monosaccharides provide a readily available source of energy. Disaccharides are two monosaccharides bonded together. Finally, polysaccharides are chains of monosaccharides that are bonded together. They're quite large. Let's do monosaccharides first. These are known as simple sugars. There's three basic ones that exist: glucose, fructose, and galactose. The combination of these make the different types of carbohydrates that we see. Monosaccharides have from 1 to 7 carbons and always end in the suffix -ose, OSC. Glucose is an important source of energy in humans. It is broken down to release hydrogen ions, and electrons, which are then used to help make ATP. The chemical formula for all three monosaccharides is the same, but the structure differs slightly. Also, each monosaccharide can be made into either a ring form or a linear form. So when you get two monosaccharides bonded together, we create a disaccharide. The way this works is two simple sugars polymerize with each other by a condensation dehydration reaction. So one carb loses its hydroxyl group, the other one loses a hydrogen, that forms water, allowing this oxygen to now be free to bond to the other one. This is called a glycosidic link. Now, the location and geometry of these bonds can vary slightly, which can give us the different types of disaccharides that we see. So there's three basic disaccharides, and here's a handy chart to help you. Maltose is formed between two glucose molecules. Sucrose is made from glucose and fructose. This is also known as table sugar. Lactose, which derives from milk products, is made from glucose and galactose. So what happens when you have several monosaccharides bonded together? Well, we call that a polysaccharide. They can be used for energy storage, such as starch in plants. Starch comes in two forms, a linear amylose and branched amylopectin form. Both forms are linkages of many glucose molecules. Polysaccharides can also be used to form structures such as plant cell walls, which are made up of cellulose. Cellulose is indigestible to animals, but gut bacteria can break it down by using the enzyme cellulase. Animals store glucose as glycogen in muscles in the liver. These are used to release glucose when necessary to aid in the movement of animals. Are carbs bad? Carbs in moderation are fine and have been used by humanity for millennia as an important source of energy. 1 gram of carbs contain 4 calories of energy. Too many carbs can lead to weight gain, as the carbs that are not used are converted into fat and stored into fat cells throughout the body, especially monosaccharides. Fiber is mostly made from insoluble cellulose and is important in making you have regular bowel movements. It may also help prevent some forms of colon cancer. From the perspective of a diet, fiber makes you feel fuller, which means you eat less, and can lose weight. In terms of which carbs are the healthiest, it's best to stick with whole grains and less simple sugars. Simple sugars provide instant energy, but can be converted into fat if it's not used. You also don't feel very full after consuming simple sugars. Whole grains are more complex, take longer to digest, and make you feel fuller longer. In our next video, we'll be looking at lipids.